The textbook reading for this video is Chapter 3, pages 38 to 43, so very little reading. And you'll also see a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon strip where Calvin is making fun of how we create verbs in the English language. He says, I like to verb words. Huh? You take nouns and adjectives and then use them as verbs. Access used to be a thing, not something you do. It got verbed. And there's always the hope that eventually you won't be able to understand anything. I mean, think about verbs that probably didn't exist a couple years ago. There weren't many YouTube videos where people twerked, were there? The English language is a living, changing animal, and verbs are some of the most challenging parts of speech or form classes for students to master. Why is this? There's at least 12 verb forms for every verb in English. We have our time tenses, now, yesterday, and tomorrow, present, past, and future. But thinking in terms of now, yesterday, and tomorrow can be very useful with even older students. And then you've got 4 different forms: simple, progressive, perfect, and then a blend, perfect, progressive. And often what you end up with is a chart that looks something like this. Here's our time tenses across the top: now, yesterday, tomorrow. And our forms are down the side: simple, progressive, perfect, and perfect progressive. The progressive form is where you have a be verb auxiliary and then your ing form of the verb. Is writing, was writing, and then future will be writing. The perfect form, we add the auxiliary for have, has, had, have, will have. Finally, we have the perfect progressive, which most of us honestly don't use in speech all that much, especially the future perfect progressive. She will have been writing. Wow. And you'll notice that the perfect progressive really does combine your be verb from the progressive and your have verb from the perfect. Have been, had been. If you were to present this chart to a student, what do you think the reaction would be? What was your reaction when this slide came up? When we grow up speaking English, it isn't like we wake up one day and have suddenly mastered all of these 12 forms. Here you'll see it says children tend to pick up on these distinctions in the following order. And here is the URL if you're interested. Start with simple present, simple past. Then we've got some present, past, present, simple past. The first 6 distinctions are clustered at the top of our chart. Simple present, past simple, some progressive. We're up here in the chart. Future tenses, perfect and perfect progressive, down here on the bottom right, are mastered later developmentally. Here we see past progressive, simple future, and future progressive. If you've ever spent much time with a toddler, you'll notice that they don't have a great concept of time. When you tell them something will happen tomorrow, they might rush to the window. When you tell them that grandma is coming tomorrow, the child might rush to the window looking for her. He doesn't understand how far away tomorrow is. To him, tomorrow is as long as 2 weeks, and he certainly doesn't get the concept of next year. So developmentally, it makes sense that it takes longer to master the future tenses. Lots of times teachers say your verb tense is off. It might help to think of it more as time frame. Again, thinking back to our chart, stay within the present, past, or future columns unless you add an adverbial time marker that lets your readers know I'm shifting. We study grammar, simple present. On Friday, we will have passed our exam, future perfect. It might be even more helpful to say, today we study grammar. In 3 days, we will have passed our exam. If you're going to stick to a column, you still have 4 different tense choices. You need a time marker when you're moving across the row. Today they are playing. Yesterday they were playing at the park. Tomorrow they will be playing at the basketball court. What if you have to find the verb in your sentence? Our book suggests that you add the word not, because unless you're dealing with a to-be verb, it will always come between an auxiliary and a main verb. If you look at this sentence, runners must train constantly, some people, especially younger students, might say runners. Running is an action, that's the verb. Someone else might say, oh, runners, that's people, that's my subject, therefore must is my verb because it comes right after the subject. Others might say train, others might say constantly because adverb, verb, aren't they all the same? If I add not to this sentence, the only place it fits well when you read it out loud is between must and train, between your auxiliary and your main verb. Not runners must train constantly. Runners not must train constantly. Runners must train not constantly. None of those sound, if you're used to the sound of English, quite right. Runners must not train constantly. Now, why would a student need to identify a verb? If you've assigned a worksheet where you have to underline the subject once and the verb twice, student definitely needs to be able to identify the verb. And there are some other reasons. As we look at learning outcomes for the state of Texas, older students are expected to identify parts of speech. So they might need to know, for the purposes of standardized testing, which word is the verb. Have you ever gotten back a paper and your teacher said you're using the wrong verb tense? Our book discusses 4 instances where you really want to use the present tense. First, if you're referring to the past, but you want to make it more immediate and more suspenseful. You want to put your audience, your reader, right there in the moment. We use the present tense, as English majors and minors, I hope, know, to analyze literature. We would say Chaucer writes about Troilus and Cressida. Hamlet is suffering from some severe psychological trauma. We use the present tense to describe things that we do every day. I brush my teeth, I get up, and to explain natural phenomena. Tornadoes are common in our part of the United States. If you're going into a classroom and you need to teach verbs, the first and most important step is to understand them yourself. That's why you take advanced grammar. You need to know about cognitive development. You shouldn't be frustrated and confused that a student writes beautiful present and past tense sentences, but can't quite wrap her mind around the future. You can teach older students to use not to locate verbs. Maybe there are some instances where worksheets and drills are helpful, especially with irregular verbs. We can learn a lot from English as a second language teachers. Their techniques and exercises often can help native speakers. We're going to look at an example of guided practice. How can we help students with verb tenses? And there are also plenty of songs and raps that help students remember the names of things like present progressive in a fun way. I want you to go to this URL. It has a list of common irregular verbs. I want you to pick 10, which are the most common, the most important to master in modern English. This is going to be on your quiz, so I'm not kidding when I say go to this URL. You'll also find it in e-courses. You can just click and go there. And because everybody has to finish the quiz at least 30 minutes before class starts, I'll be able to go through and do a little bit of analysis. Did we all choose one or two verbs? Or do we all have 10 completely different lists and different rationale? And this will be where we start our next in-person meeting. I mentioned student learning outcomes and standards. Here are the relevant TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills for Verbs. Our new standardized test, the STAR exam, is still based on TEKS. And what we see here is that from 4th through 11th grade, the demands increase. In 4th grade, the focus is on irregular verbs. 5th grade, you add active voice. 6th grade, still irregular verbs, but active and passive voice. Then in 7th and 8th grade, here's where being able to locate a verb in a sentence might start to be more important. They have to identify verbs, including perfect and progressive tenses. High schoolers, more complexity, and we're also dealing with verbals, which we haven't discussed yet, we will, gerunds, infinitives, and participles. This is an example of guided practice according to the web source, which you'll see here. It's intended for grades 3 or 4. And here's what you as the teacher would do. You'd pass out copies of this short paragraph about a dog and a cat. You'd ask students to read it, and then you'd ask them what the problem is. You would ask them to identify the verbs in this paragraph. And then you would guide them to see that some of the verbs are about what's happening now, present, some are past, and some are future. And then you'd assign students in small groups to rewrite the paragraph. You'd have your past tense group, your present tense group, your future. You would hope that your future tense group would come up with something like, the dog will see the cat and he will bark. He will run down the driveway and jump on the cat's back. The cat will howl. And then you'd have to think about, what do you want to do with the results? Are students going to exchange, share them? Are you going to talk in a later class about how you could mix tenses in this paragraph with time markers? And your time markers for 3rd and 4th grade can be as simple as now and next. Now the dog sees the cat, and next he will bark. Things to consider, and you do want to consider it because, again, it's going to be a question on your quiz. Tips from ESL teachers. First, don't teach all the tenses at once. 12 is overwhelming. Consider working by column. Move students through all the present tenses, and this is especially good for conversation. People want to talk about what they're doing right now. Then the past, then the future. Students may not know the name of a particular tense. You can teach them that. You can come up with your own terminology. And you also might want to focus on the tenses that we use more in speech. Most of us don't use the future perfect progressive, I will have been studying. We don't say that very often. And many of us won't ever write much in the future present progressive. Practice questions. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes this practice is good for native speakers as well. Look at these 2 questions. What's your choice, A, B, or C? As soon as I get home, it started to rain heavily. As soon as I got home, it started to rain heavily. Or, as soon as I will have gotten home, it started to rain heavily. In this case, we want the simple past. As soon as I got home, it started to rain. What about the next one? They had been together for 5 years when they decided to get married. They have been together for 5 years when they decided to get married. Or they were together for 5 years when they decided to get married. Past perfect progressive. They had been together. Now, how many of you are saying, well, wait a minute. They were together for 5 years when they decided to get married. Isn't that okay? Often there isn't just one verb form. that will complete a sentence. In our atmosphere of standardized testing, we hope that this kind of question never appears on a test, because a student could very well argue that both A and C are correct selections. Do you teach students about the complexity? All of their different options? Try these. What's your choice? A, B, or C? For the first one, we need the future perfect. By the end of the year, she will have already graduated. Because the time marker is pushing us into the future, we need a selection that's in a future time frame. What about the second one? I wish I were a millionaire so I could travel all over the world. In this case, we need the past subjunctive mood. I wish I were. If you've studied Spanish grammar or French grammar to a relatively advanced level, you've learned about the subjunctive mood that you use when things are unknown or conditional, when you're expressing a wish. Now, how many of you would mark a student wrong if she put, I wish I was a millionaire? Which grammatical errors do we point out and ask students to correct? And which ones do we maybe let slide? In a few weeks, you're going to have to submit your preliminary proposal for your final original project, and you might decide to do a research paper on teaching verbs to non-native English speakers. When you look for research, you're looking for anything that has ESL, EFL, ELL, or L1, L2. If you find an article that references any of these acronyms, it has something to do with teaching non-native speakers. This is the end of your video for class. Don't forget to take your quiz. And welcome to our week on verbs.